Hello, everybody.
Hi, welcome to Lunchtime Listens here at the Deerfield Public Library Twitch channel. I'm Megan.
I'm Christina.
I'm new here, so I'm excited to hear where we're at the Hobbit.
Yes. So, in our last segment last week, we escaped the spiders and we also escaped the elves.
Oh, good.
So they made it into their little barrels and traveled down the river, floating around, and finally made it to our town, which I forget what it's called.
Well, let's find out. This is Chapter 10, A Warm Welcome. The day grew lighter and warmer as they floated along. After a while, the river rounded a steep shoulder of land that came down upon their left. Under its rocky feet, like an inland cliff, the deepest stream had flowed lapping and bubbling. Suddenly, the cliff fell away. The shores sank, the trees ended. Then, Bilbo saw a sight. The land opened wide about him, filled with the waters of the river, which broke up and wandered in 100 winding courses, or halted in marshes and pools dotted with isles on every side. But still, a strong water flowed on steadily through the mist. And far away, its dark head in a torn cloud, there loomed the mountain. Its nearest neighbors to the northeast and the tumbled land that joined it to them could not be seen. All alone it rose and looked across the marshes to the forest. The lonely mountain. Bilbo had come far and through many adventures to see it, and now he did not like the look of it in the least. As he listened to the talk of the raftsmen and pieced together the scraps of information they let fall, he soon realized that he was very fortunate ever to have seen it all at all, even from the distance. Dreary as had been his imprisonment, and unpleasant as was his position, to say nothing of the poor dwarves underneath him, still he had been more lucky than he had guessed. The talk was all of the trade that had came and went on the waterways and the growth of the traffic on the river, as the roads out of the east towards Mirkwood vanished or fell into disuse, and of the bickerings of the lakemen and the wood elves about the upkeep of the forest river and the care of the banks. Those lands had changed much since the days when dwarves dwelt in the mountain, days which most people now remembered only as a very shadowy tradition. They had changed even in recent years, and since the last news that Gandalf had had them. Great floods and rains had swollen the waters that flow east, and there had been an earthquake or two, which some were inclined to attribute to the dragon, alluding to him chiefly with a curse and an ominous nod in the direction of the mountain. The marshes and bogs had spread wider and wider on either side. Paths had vanished, and many a rider and wanderer too, if they had tried to find the lost ways across. The elf road through the wood, which dwarves had followed on the advice of Thoron, now came to a doubtful and little-used end at the eastern edge of the forest. Only the river offered any longer a safe way from the skirts of Mirkwood in the north to the mountain-shadowed plains beyond, and the river was guarded by the wood elves as king. So you see, Bilbo had come in the end by the only road that was any good. It might have been some comfort to Mr. Baggins, shivering on the barrels, if he had known that news of this had reached Gandalf far away and given him great anxiety, and that he was in fact finishing his other business, which does not come into this tale, and getting ready to come in search of Thorin's company. But Bilbo did not know it. All he knew was that the river seemed to go on and on and on forever, and he was hungry and had a nasty cold in the nose and did not like the way the mountains seemed to frown at him and threaten him as it drew nearer. After a while, however, the river took a more southerly course, and the mountain receded again. And at last, late in the day, the shores grew rocky. The river gathered all its wandering waters together into a deep and rapid flood, and then swept along at a great speed. The sun had set when, turning with another sweep towards the east, the river forest rushed into the long lake. There, it had a wide mouth with stony cliff-like gates at either side, whose feet were piled with shingles. The long lake. Bilbo had never imagined that any water that was not the sea could look so big. It was so wide that the opposite shores looked small and far, but it was so long that its northerly end, which pointed towards the mountain, could not be seen at all. Only from the map did Bilbo know that away up there, where the stars of the wane were already twinkling, the running river came down into the lake from Dale, and with the forest river filled with deep waters, what must once have been a great, deep, rocky valley. At the southern end of the doubled waters poured out again over high waterfalls, and ran away hurriedly to unknown lands. In the still evening air, the noise of the falls could be heard like a distant roar. Not far from the mouth of the forest river was the strange town he heard the elves speak of in the king's cellars. It was not built on the shore, though there were a few huts and buildings there, but right out on the surface of the lake, protected from the swirl of the entering river by a promontory of rock which formed a calm bay. A great bridge made of wood ran out to where on huge piles made of forest trees was built a busy wooden town. Not a town of elves, but of men, who still dared to dwell here under the shadow of the distant Dragon Mountain. They still throve on the trade that came up the great river from the south, and was carted past the walls to their town. But in the great days of old, when Dale in the north was rich and prosperous, they had been wealthy and powerful, and there had been fleets of boats on the waters. When Dale in the north was rich and prosperous, they had been wealthy and powerful, and there had been fleets of boats on the waters, and some were filled with gold, and some with warriors in armor. There had been wars and deeds which were now only a legend. The rotting piles of the greater town could still be seen along the shores when the water sank into a draught. But men remembered little of all that, though some still sang old songs of the dwarf kings in the mountain, Thorir and Thrain of the race of Durin, and of the coming of the dragon and the fall of the lords of Dale. Some sang too that Thorir and Thurin would come back one day, and gold would flow in rivers, the mountain gates, and all that land would be filled with new song, new laughter. But this pleasant legend did not much affect their daily business. As soon as the raft of barrels came in sight, boats roared out from the piles of the town, and voices hailed the raft stirrers. Then ropes were cast and oars were pulled, and soon the raft was drawn out of the current of the forest river and towed away round the high shoulder of rock into the little bay of Lake Town. There it was moored not far from the shore head of the great bridge. Soon men would come from the up from the south and take some of the casks away, and others they would fill with goods they had brought to be taken back up the stream to the wood elf's home. In the meanwhile, the perils were left afloat while the elves of the raft and the boatmen went to feast in Lake Town. They would have been surprised if they could have seen what happened down by the shore after they had gone and the shades of night had fallen. First of all, a barrel was cut loose by Bilbo and pushed to the shore and opened. Groans came from inside, and out crept a most unhappy dwarf. What straw was in his draggled beard? He was so sore and stiff, so bruised and buffeted, he could hardly stand or stumble through the shallow water to lie groaning on the shore. He had a famished and savage look like a dog that had been chained and forgotten in a kennel for a week. It was Thorin, but you could only have told it by his golden chain and by the color of his now dirty and tattered sky blue hood with its tarnished silver tassel. It was some time before he would be even polite to the Hobbit. Can't believe it. Well, are you alive or are you dead? Asked Bilbo quite crossly.
He's like, I saved you.
Perhaps he had forgotten that he had at least one good meal more than the dwarves, and also the use of his arms and legs, not to speak of a greater allowance of air. Yeah, dang. Are you still in prison or are you free? If you want food and if you want to go on with this silly adventure, it's yours after all, and not mine. You had better slap your arms and rub your legs and try and help me get the others out while there is a chance.
Dang.
Bilbo was like, get it together. I love Bilbo.
No nonsense.
Truly. Thorin, of course, saw the sense of this, so after a few more groans, he got up and helped the Hobbit as well as he could. In the darkness, floundering in the cold water, they had a difficult and very nasty job finding which were the right barrels. Oh man. Knocking outside and calling, only discovered about 6 dwarfs that could answer. These were unpacked and helped ashore, for they sat or lay muttering and moaning. They were so soaked and bruised and cramped that they could hardly yet realize their release or be properly thankful for it. Dwalin and Balin were two of the most unhappy, and it was no good asking them for help. Before and Beaufort were less knocked about and drier, but they lay down and would do nothing. Philly and Killy, however, who were young, were dwarfs, and had also been packed more neatly with plenty of straw into smaller casks, came out more or less smiling, with only a bruise or two and a stiffness that soon wore off. I hope I never smell the smell of apples again, said Philly. My tub was full of it. To smell apples everlastingly when you can scarcely move and are cold and sick with hunger is maddening. I could eat anything in the wide world now for hours on end, but not an apple. With the willing help of Philly and Killy, Thorin and Bilbo at last discovered the remainder of the company and got them out. Poor fat Bomber was asleep or senseless. Dory, Nori, Ori, Orin, and Glowin were waterlogged and seemed only half alive. They all had to be carried one by one and lay helpless on the shore. Whew.
These poor guys.
I know! Well, here we are, said Thorin. And I suppose we ought to thank our stars and Mr. Baggins. I am sure he has a right to expect it, though I wish he could have arranged a more comfortable journey. Still, I'll very much at your service once more, Mr. Baggins. No doubt we shall feel properly grateful when we are fat and recovered. In the meanwhile, what next? I suggest Lake Town, said Bilbo. What else is there? Nothing else could, of course, be suggested, so leaving the others, Thorin and Philly and Killy and the Hobbit went along the shore to the Great Bridge. There were guards at the head of it, but they were not keeping very careful watch, for it was so long since there had been any real need. Except for occasional squabbles about river tolls, they were friends with the Wood Elves. Other folk were far away, and some of the younger people in the town openly doubted the existence of any dragon in the mountain, and laughed at the graybeards and gammers who said that they had seen him flying in the sky in their young days. That being so, it is not surprising that the guards were drinking and laughing by fire in their huts, and did not hear the noise of the unpacking of the dwarves or the footsteps of the 4 scouts. Their astonishment was enormous when Thorin Oakenshield stepped in through the door. Who are you and what do you want? They shouted, leaping to their feet and groping for weapons. Thorin, son of Thran, son of Thor, king under the mountain, said the dwarf in a loud voice, and he looked it, in spite of his torn clothes and draggled hood. The gold gleamed up his neck and waist. His eyes were dark and deep. I have come back. I wish to see the master of your town. Then there was a tremendous excitement. Some of the more foolish ran out of the hut as if they expected the mountain to go golden in the night, and all the waters of the lake turned yellow right away. The captain of the guard came forward. And who are these? He asked, pointing to Philly and Killy and Bilbo. The sons of my father's daughter, answered Thorin, Philly and Killy of the race of Durin, and Mr. Baggins, who has traveled with us out of the west. If you come in peace, lay down your arms, said the captain. We have none, said Thorin, and it was true enough. Their knives had been taken from them by the Wood Elves, and the great sword Orcris too. Bilbo had his short sword, hidden as usual, but he said nothing about that. We have no need of weapons, who return at last to our own as spoken of old, nor could we fight against so many. Take us to your master. He is at feast, said the captain. Then all the more reason for taking us to him, burst from Philly, who was getting impatient at these solemnities. We are worn and famished after our long road, and we have sick comrades. Now make haste and let us have no more words, or your master may have something to say to you. Follow me then, said the captain, and with 6 men about them, he led them over the bridge, through the gates, and into the marketplace of the town. There was a wide circle of quiet water surrounded by the tall piles on which were the greater houses, and by the wooden quays with many steps and ladders going down to the surface of the lake. From one great hall shone many lights, and there came the sound of many voices. They passed its door and stood blinking in the light, looking at long tables filled with folk. I am Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thor, king under the mountain. I returned, cried Thorin in a loud voice from the door, before the captain could say anything. All leapt to their feet. The master of the town sprang from his great chair. But none rose in greater surprise than the raftsmen of the elves who were sitting at the lower end of the hall. Pressing forward before the master's table, they cried, "These are prisoners of our king that have escaped, wandering vagabond dwarves that could not give any good account of themselves, sneaking through the woods and molesting our people." "Is this true?" asked the master. As a matter of fact, he thought it far more likely than the return of the king under the mountain, if any such person had ever existed. "It is true that we were wrongfully waylaid by that elven king and imprisoned without cause as we journeyed back to our own land," answered Thorin. "But luck nor bar may hinder the homecoming spoken of old. Nor is this town in the wood elves' realm. I speak to the master of the town, of the men of the lake, not the wrathmen of the king." Then the master hesitated and looked from one to the other. The Elven King was very powerful in those parts, and the master wished for no enmity from him. Nor did he think much of old songs, giving his mind to trade and tolls, to cargoes and gold, to which habit he owed his position. Others were of a different mind, however, and quickly the matter was settled without him. The news had spread from the doors of the hall like fire through the town. People were shouting inside the hall and outside it. The quays were thronged with hurrying feet. Some began to sing snatches of old songs concerning the return of the king under the mountain, that it was Thor's grandson, not Thor himself, that had come back, did not bother them at all. Others took up the song, and it rolled loud and high over the lake. The song goes like this. "The king beneath the mountains, the king of carved stone, the lord of silver fountains, shall come into his own. His crown shall be upholden, his harp shall be restrung, his hall shall echo golden, to songs of yore resung. The woods shall wave on mountains, and grass beneath the sun. His wealth shall flow in fountains, and the rivers golden run. The streams shall run in gladness, the lakes shall shine and burn. All sorrow fail in sadness at the mountain king's return." So they sang, or very like that, only there was a great deal more of it, and there was much shouting as well as the music of harps and of fiddles mixed up with it. Indeed, such an excitement had not been known in the town in the memory of the oldest grandfather. The wood elves themselves began to wonder greatly, and even to be afraid. They did not know, of course, how Thorin had escaped, and they began to think the king might have made some serious mistake. As for the master, he saw there was nothing else for it but to obey the general clamor, for the moment at any rate, and to pretend to believe that Thorin was what he said. So he gave up to him his own great chair, and set Billy and Killy beside him in places of honor. Even Bilbo was given a seat at the high table, and no explanation of where he came in, whose songs had alluded to him, even the obscurest way, was asked for in the general bustle. Soon afterwards, the other dwarves were brought into the town in scenes of astonishing enthusiasm. They were all doctored and fed and housed and pampered in a most delightful and satisfactory fashion. A large house was given up to Thorin and his company. Boats and rowers were put at their service, and crowds sat outside and sang songs all day, or cheered if any dwarf showed so much as his nose. Some of the songs were old ones, but some of them were quite new and spoken confidently of the sudden death of the dragon and of cargoes of rich presents coming down the river to Lake Town. These were inspired largely by the master, and they did not particularly please the dwarves, but in the meantime they were well contented, and they quickly grew fat and strong again. Indeed, within a week they were quite recovered, fitted out in fine cloth of proper colors, with beards, combs, and trimmed, and proud steps. Thorin looked and walked as if his kingdom was already regained, and Smaug chopped up into little pieces. Then, as he had said, the dwarf's good feelings towards the little hobbit grew stronger every day. There were no more groans or grumbles. They drank his health, and they patted him on the back, and they made a great fuss of him, which was just as well, for he was not feeling particularly cheerful. He had not forgotten the look of the mountain, nor the thought of the dragon, and he had besides a shocking cold. For 3 days he sneezed and coughed, and he could not go out. And even after that, his speeches at banquets were limited to, "Thank you very much." In the meanwhile, the wood elves had gone back to the forest river with their cargoes, and there was great excitement in the king's palace. I have never heard what happened to the chief, the guards, and the butler, Nothing, of course, was ever said about keys or barrels while the dwarves stayed in Lake Town, and Bilbo was careful never to become invisible. Still, I dare say, more was guessed than was known, though doubtless Mr. Baggins remained a bit of a mystery. In any case, the king knew now the dwarf's errand, and thought he did, and he said to himself, "Very well, we'll see. No treasure will come back through Mirkwood without my having something to say in the matter, but I expect they will all come to a bad end, and serve them right." He, at any rate, did not believe in dwarves fighting and killing dragons like Smaug, and he strongly suspected attempted burglary or something like it, which shows he was a wise elf and wiser than the men of the town, though not quite right, as we shall see in the end. He sent out his spies about the shores of the lake and as far northward towards the mountain as they would go, and waited. At the end of a fortnight, Thorn began to think of departure. While the enthusiasm still lasted in the town was the time to get help. It would not do to let everything cool down with delay. So he spoke with the master and his counselors and said that soon he and his company must go on towards the mountain. Then, for the first time, the master was surprised and a little frightened, and he wondered if Thorn was, after all, really a descendant of the old kings. He had never thought the dwarves would actually dare to approach Smaug, but believed they were frauds who would sooner or later be discovered and be turned out. He was wrong. Thorn, of course, is really the grandson of the king of the mountain, and there is no knowing what a dwarf will not dare and do for revenge or the recovery of his own. But the master was not sorry at all to let them go. They were expensive to keep.
Oh, there's like 14 of them.
How much can they eat, you know?
A lot.
Just not apples.
Yeah.
And their arrival had turned things into a long holiday, in which business was at a standstill. Let them go and bother Smaug, and see how he welcomes them, he thought. Certainly, O Thorn, Thorn's son, was what he said. You must claim your own. The hour is at hand, spoken of old. What help we can offer shall be yours, and we trust to your gratitude when your kingdom is regained. So one day, although autumn was now getting far on, and winds were cold, and leaves were falling fast, 3 large boats left Lake Town, laden with rowers, dwarves, Mr. Baggins, and many provisions. Horses and ponies had been sent round by circuitous paths to meet them at their appointed landing place. The master and his counselors bade them farewell from the great steps of the town hall that went down to the lake. People sang on the quays and out of the windows. The white oars dipped and splashed, and off they went north up the lake on the last stage of their happy journey, of their long journey. The only person thoroughly unhappy was Bilbo.
On the doorstep. In 2 days going, they rowed right up the long lake and passed out into the river running. Oh yeah, I forgot. So much alliteration.
It's hard.
And now they could all see the lonely mountain towering grim and tall before them. The stream was strong and they're going slow. At the end of the 3rd day, some miles up the river, they drew into the left or western bank and disembarked. Here they were joined by the horses with other provisions and necessaries and the ponies for their own use that had been sent to meet them. They packed what they could on the ponies, and the rest was made into a store under a tent. But none of the men of the town would stay with them, even for the night so near the shadow of the mountain. Not at any rate until the songs have come true, said they. It was easier to believe in the dragon and less easy to believe in Thorin in these wild parts. Indeed, their stores had no need of any guard, for all the land was desolate and empty. So their escort left them, making off swiftly down the river and the shoreward paths, although the night was already drawing on. I second guess what I was reading.
The sentences are so long.
They spent a cold and lonely night, and their spirits fell. The next day, they set out again. Balin and Bilbo... Wait, Balin, right? Balin.
That sounds right.
Yeah. Balin and Bilbo rode behind each... I know their names rhyme, but when it's one without the other, then I'm like, what? Anne is the usual one that has all the knowledge.
She's so good.
Balin and Bilbo rode behind, each leading another pony heavily laden beside him. The others were some way ahead, picking out a slow road, for there were no paths. They made northwest, slanting away from the river running and drawing ever nearer and nearer to a great spur of the mountain that was flung out southwards towards them. It was a weary journey and a quiet and stealthy one. There was no laughter or song or sound of harps, and the pride and hopes which had stirred in their hearts at the singing of old songs by the lake died away to a plodding gloom. They knew that they were drawing near to the end of their journey and that it might be a very horrible end. The land about them grew bleak and barren, though once, as Thorin told them, it had been green and fair. There was little grass, and before long there was neither bush nor tree, and only broken and blackened stumps to speak of, ones long vanished. They were come to the desolation of the dragon, and they were come at the waning of the year. They reached the skirts of the mountain all the same, without meeting any danger or any sign of the dragon, other than the wilderness he had made about his lair. The mountain lay dark and silent before them, and ever higher above them. They made their first camp on the western side of the great southern spur, which ended in a height called Ravenhill. On this there had been an old watchpost, but they dared not climb it yet. It was too exposed. Before setting out to search the western spurs of the mountain for the hidden door on which all their hopes rested, Thorin sent out a scouting expedition to spy out the land to the south, where the front gate stood. For this purpose, he chose Balin and Fili and Kili, and with them went Bilbo. They marched under the gray and silent cliffs to the feet of Ravenhill. There, the river, after winding a wide loop over the valley of Dale, turned from the mountain on its road to the lake, flowing swift and noisily. Its bank was bare and rocky, tall and steep above the stream, and gazing out from it over the narrow water, foaming and splashing among many boulders, they could see in the wide valley shadowed by the mountain's arms the gray ruins of ancient houses, towers, and walls. There lies all that is left of Dale, said Balin. The mountain's sides were green with woods, and all the sheltered valley rich and pleasant in the days when the bells rang in that town. He looked both sad and grim as he said this. He had been one of Thorin's companions on the day the dragon came. They did not dare to follow the river much further towards the gate, but they went on beyond the end of the southern spur, until lying hidden behind a rock, they could look out and see the dark cavernous opening in a great cliff wall between the arms of the mountain. Out of it the waters of the running river sprang, and out of it too there came a steam and a dark smoke. Nothing moved in the waste, save the vapor and the water, and every now and again a black and ominous crow. The only sound was the sound of the stony water, and every now and again the harsh croak of a bird. Balin shuddered. "Let us return," he said. Wait, is Balin?
Sure.
I think it's Balin. Sorry, I'm second guessing myself. I'm just going to keep switching every time. "Let us return," he said. "We can do no good here, and I don't like these dark birds. They look like spies of evil." Crows.
I mean, I agree with them as a murder, so.
That's true. And crows are really smart, and they hold grudges, so they'll go after your family. It's true. I read it. "The dragon is still alive and in the halls under the mountain then, or I imagine so from the smoke," said the Hobbit. "That does not prove it," said Balin, "though I don't doubt you are right. But he might be gone away sometime, or he might be lying out on the mountainside keeping watch. And still I expect smokes and steams would come out of the gates, and all the halls within must be filled with his foul reek." With such gloomy thoughts, followed ever by croaking crows above them, they made their weary way back to the camp. Only in June they had been guests in the fair house of Elrond. And though autumn was now crawling towards winter, that pleasant time now seemed years ago. They were alone in the perilous waste, without hope of further help. They were at the end of their journey, but as far as ever, it seemed, from the end of their quest. None of them had much spirit left. Now, strange to say, Mr. Baggins had more than the others. He would often borrow Thorin's map and gaze at it, pondering over the runes and the message of the moon letters Elrond had read. It was he that made the dwarves begin the dangerous search on the western slopes for the secret door. They moved their camp then to a long valley, narrower than the great dale in the south, where the gates of the river stood, and walled with lower spurs of the mountain. Two of these here thrust forward west from the main mass in long, steep-sided ridges that fell ever downwards towards the plain. On this western side, there were fewer signs of the dragon's marauding feet, and there was some grass for their ponies. From this western camp, shadowed all day by cliff and wall until the sun began to sink towards the forest, day by day they toiled in parties searching for paths up the mountainside. If the map was true, somewhere high above the cliff at the valley's head must stand the secret door. Day by day they came back to their camp without success. But at last, unexpectedly, they found what they were seeking. Fili and Kili and the Hobbit went back one day down the valley and scrambled among the tumbled rocks at its southern corner. About midday, creeping behind a great stone that stood alone like a pillar, Bilbo came on what looked like rough steps going upwards. Following these excitedly, he and the dwarfs found traces of a narrow track, often lost, often rediscovered, that wandered on to the top of the southern ridge and brought them at last to a still narrower ledge, which turned north across the face of the mountain. Looking down, they saw that they were at the top of the cliff at the valley's head, and were gazing down on their own camp below. Silently, clinging to the rocky wall on the right, they went in a single file along the ledge, till the wall opened and they turned into a little steep-walled bay, grassy-floored, still and quiet. Its entrance, which they had found, could not be seen from below because of the overhang of the cliff, nor from further off because it was so small that it looked like a dark crack and no more. It was not a cave and was open to the sky above, but at its inner end, a flat wall rose up that in the lower part, close to the ground, was as smooth and upright as mason's work, but without a joint or crevice to be seen. No sign was there of post or lintel or threshold, nor any sign of bar or bolt or keyhole, yet they did not doubt that they had found the door at last. They beat on it, they thrust and pushed at it, they implored it to move, they spoke fragments of broken spells of opening, and nothing stirred. At last, tired out, they rested on the grass at its feet, and then at evening began their long climb down. There was excitement in the camp that night. In the morning they prepared to move once more. Only Beaufort and Bomber were left behind to guard the ponies and such stores as they had brought with them from the river. The others went down the valley and up the newly found path and so to the narrow ledge. Along this they could carry no bundles or packs, so narrow and breathless was it, with a fall of 150 feet beside them to the sharp rocks below. But each of them took a good coil of rope, wound tight around his waist, and so at last, without mishap, they reached the little grassy bay. There they made their third camp, hauling up what they needed from below with their ropes. Down the same way, they were able occasionally to lower one of the more active dwarves, such as Keely. Just lower. Such as Keely to exchange such news as there was, or to take a share in the guard below, while Boffer was hauled up to the higher camp. Bomber would not come up either the rope or the path. I am too fat for such fly walks, he said. I should turn dizzy and tread on my beard, and then you'd be 13 again, and the knotted ropes are too slender for my weight. Luckily for him, that was not true, as you will see. In the meanwhile, some of them explored the ledge beyond the opening and found a path that led higher and higher on the mountain, but they did not dare to venture very far that way, nor was there much use in it. Out up there, a silence reigned, broken by no bird or sound except that of the wind in the crannies of the stone. They spoke low and never called or sang, for danger brooded in every rock. The others, who were busy with the secret of the door, had no more success. They were too eager to trouble about the runes or the moon letters, but tried without resting to discover where exactly in the smooth face of the rock the door was hidden. They had brought picks and tools of many sorts from Lake Town, and at first they tried to use these. But when they struck the stone, the handles splintered and jarred their arms cruelly, and the steel heads broke or bent like lead. Mining work, they saw clearly, was no good against the magic that had shut this door, and they grew terrified, too, of the echoing noise. Bilbo found sitting on the doorstep lonesome and wearisome. There was not a doorstep, of course, really, but they used to call the little grassy space between the wall and the opening the doorstep, in fun, remembering Bilbo's words long ago at the unexpected party in his hobbit hole, when he said they could sit on the doorstep till they thought of something, and sit and think they did, or wandered aimlessly about, and glummer they became. Their spirits had risen a little at the discovery of the path, but now they sank into their boots, and yet they would not give it up and go away. The Hobbit was no longer much brighter than the dwarfs. He would do nothing but sit with his back to the rock face and stare away west through the opening, over the cliff, over the wide lands to the black wall of Mirkwood, and to the distances beyond, in which he sometimes thought he could catch glimpses of the misty mountains, small and far. If the dwarfs asked him what he was doing, he answered, "You said sitting on the doorstep and thinking would be my job, not to mention getting inside, so I am sitting and thinking." But I'm afraid he was not thinking much of the job, but of what lay beyond the blue distance, the quiet western land and the hill and his hobbit hole under it. A large gray stone lay in the center of the grass, and he stared moodily at it and watched the great snails. They seemed to love the little shut-in bay with its walls of cool rock, and there were many of them of huge size, crawling slowly and stickily along its sides. "Tomorrow begins the last week of autumn," said Thorin one day. "And winter comes after autumn," said Bifur. "And next year after that," said Dwalin. "And our beards will grow until they hang down the cliff to the valley before anything happens here. What is our burglar doing for us? Since he has got an invisible ring and ought to be a specially excellent performer now, I'm beginning to think he might go through the front gate and spy things out a bit." Bilbo heard this. The dwarves were on the rocks just above the enclosure where he was sitting, and good gracious, he thought, so that is what they are beginning to think, is it? It is always poor me that has to get them out of their difficulties, at least since the wizard left. Whatever am I going to do? I might have known that something dreadful would happen to me in the end. I don't think I could bear to see the unhappy valley of Dale again, and as for that steaming gate. That night he was very miserable and hardly slept. Next day the dwarfs all went wandering off in various directions. Some were exercising their ponies down below, some were roving about the mountainside. All day Bilbo sat gloomily in the grassy bay, gazing at the stone, or out west through the narrow opening. He had a queer feeling that he was waiting for something. Perhaps the wizard will suddenly come back today, he thought. If he lifted his head, he could see a glimpse of the distant forest. As the sun turned west, there was a gleam of yellow upon its far roof, as if the light caught the last pale leaves. Soon he saw the orange ball of the sun sinking towards the level of his eyes. He went to the opening, and there, pale and faint, was a thin new moon above the rim of earth. At that very moment, he heard a sharp crack behind him. There, on the gray stone in the grass, was an enormous thrush, nearly coal black, its pale yellow breast freckled with dark spots. Crack! It had caught a snail and was knocking it on the stone. Crack! Crack! Suddenly, Bilbo understood. Forgetting all danger, he stood on the ledge and hailed the dwarfs, shouting and waving. Those that were nearest came tumbling over the rocks and as fast as they could along the ledge to him, wondering what on earth was the matter. The others shouted to be hauled up the ropes, except Bomber, of course. He was asleep. Checks out. Quickly, Bilbo explained. They all fell silent. The hobbit standing by the gray stone and the dwarfs with wagging beards watched impatiently. The sun sank lower and lower, and their hopes fell. It sank into a belt of reddened cloud and disappeared. The dwarfs groaned, but still Bilbo stood, almost without moving. The little moon was dipping to the horizon. Everything was coming on. Evening was coming on. Then, suddenly, when their hope was lowest, a red ray of the sun escaped like a finger through a rent in the cloud. A gleam of light came straight through the opening into the bay and fell on the smooth rock surface. The old thrush, who had been watching from a high perch with beady eyes and head cocked on one side, gave a sudden trill. There was a loud crack. A flake of rock split from the wall and fell. A hole appeared suddenly about 3 feet from the ground. Quickly, trembling lest the chance should fade, the dwarfs rushed to the rock and pushed, in vain. The key, cried Bilbo. Where is Thorin? Thorin hurried up. The key, shouted Bilbo, the key that went with the map. Try it now, while there is still time. Then Thorin stepped up and drew the key on its chain from around his neck. He put it in the hole. It fitted and it turned. Snap! The gleam went out. The sun sank. The moon was gone and evening sprang into the sky. Now they all pushed together, and slowly a part of the rock wall gave way. Long, straight cracks appeared and widened. A door 5 feet high and 3 broad was outlined, and slowly, without a sound, swung inwards. It seemed as if darkness flowed out like vapor from the hole in the mountainside, and deep darkness in which nothing could be seen lay before their eyes, a yawning mouth leading in and down. Dun, dun, dun.
Well, that's a cliffhanger.
Yes. That's where we'll end today. Thank you so much for listening, for tuning in. If you missed part of today or any of our previous chapters, they are on our YouTube channel, Deerfield Public Library. This current episode will be added to the YouTube channel on Thursday, and we'll see you all next Monday. So again, thank you for coming. I'm Christina.
I'm Megan.
Bye.